You are now.
1, 2, 3, 4.
You are now tuned in to the FuseBox Radio Broadcast with DJ Fusion and John Judah.
You're as good as they say you are.
Syndicated worldwide to bring real black radio back to the masses.
All right, everybody, 1 2 1 2. What's going on? You're now in tune to another session of the syndicated worldwide FuseBox Radio Broadcast, bringing the balance back to black radio since 1998. Now on your favorite podcast app and or internet radio station, doing our thing, bringing you a nice diverse mix of independent and mainstream music, hip-hop, soul, funk, jazz, reggae, and more, along with some news and commentary here and there, and soon we'll be back on the interview swing as well. On the music and commentary end, you got myself, DJ Fusion. On the side, you got my co-host and partner who does the same. Let me have him go on ahead and introduce himself.
Yes, indeed, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming back. Of course, the truth and authentic is back. Of course, DJ Fusion, of course, myself. The Grand Imperial Funky One, a.k.a. Pretty Ricky McJiggy, a.k.a. I Saw Raw Black Hawk, a.k.a. your daughter's favorite stepfather, a.k.a. the funk author. Yes, indeed, FuseBox Radio definitely coming to bring it to you. Glad you all have come back. Got some good views and, of course, tunes. Yes, indeed, yes, indeed. But check this. The sun of Sirius star system shines outstanding. The God keeps it manly. The funk is uncanny. Go tell your sister Aunt and Manny that the nappy grand prevails plus. Never stood still, never been a failure. Them hate the fact there's the emergence of cosmic genitalia. Yes, indeed. The truth is what we're going to tell you. DJ Fusion, Assault Rock Black Hawk, in the mix, never a failure. What's the deal, Fusion?
I'm doing okay. I'm just seeing you here like spitting 16s right now, but that's all right, you know. I'm a little nervous about that, you know, daughter's favorite stepfather joint. That's a little that's a little bit of an odd one there, but we'll break that down another day. Anyway, shout out to everybody who's been checking us out and listening to us, whether, you know, you are old schoolers. Some of y'all are super old schoolers who've been listening to the show, to those who might have just ran into us, you know, via recommendation, whether it's, you know, via your peoples or algorithm or whatever. We deeply appreciate y'all checking us out and supporting what we do here as an independent media outlet. Real quick on the promo spiel in before we get into some talk and the music. You can always check out what's going on to FuseBox Radio Broadcast fam over at our official website, FuseBoxRadio.com. That is FUSEBOXRADIO.com. Our official blog site. You can reach it by one or two means. We still have the BlackRadioWasBack.com site that actually routes to our updated blog site, the Futon Dun, TheFutondun.com, where besides blog posts and stuff, we also do live streaming there each week. More programming is coming in the mix very, very soon, but as of right now, folks have the live mixing steeds going on Sunday afternoon from 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time with various replays throughout the week. Shout out to the folks over at Streamlabs, Mixcloud Live, Twitch, and other distributors in terms of us getting that joint built up and what have you, to not just do our thing, but also to do our thing and have artists getting paid through that wonderful net royalty steez and what have you, because we wanted to make sure that it was, you know, nice and fair, not just, you know, playing joints or whatever just because and all of that. And with everything, if you check us out through your favorite podcast app of choice and you dig what we do, please definitely give us a recommendation if those apps have that, because that actually gets us to more people's ears in terms of more of that algorithmic mix and so forth and so on in terms of what is being recommended to you. And we're still in the Rona 20s, the COVID era, all that type of stuff. So live events right now aren't popping up, but when they do, we will definitely let you know. But in the meantime, check us out online through this outlet. And again, thefutondun.com. And let me see here. Shout out to everybody who's been listening in and checking us out so far. We deeply appreciate you. On the social media, everything is either under FuseBox Radio or the Futon Done, so definitely go on ahead and follow us, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, so forth, and so on that end. With the Facebook page, that's the only one that's different. It's facebook.com/FuseBox Radio Show. So FuseBox Radio and Show attached to it. So you can go on ahead and check us out. And lastly, on the following, and because we do stuff through Mixcloud and Mixcloud Live, we've been on board with them for a while. And we deeply appreciate that they have, the outlet now where people can, not just stream music sets and stuff live, but to also have artists get paid besides the regular audio archiving we've been doing with them. Definitely follow us on Mixcloud at mixcloud.com/FuseBox Radio and spreading them links and stuff. And we appreciate you there. So at the moment, that's the end of the promo spiel. And Yep. And with that, before we get into my mix and the Black Hawks mix, definitely got to get into some commentary, because for those who thought everything was going to be cool after 2020 ended and 2021 was going to begin, we got to remember that time is an artificial construct, and things happen when they are supposed to happen, apparently, and that includes good things, and that also includes stuff that looks like insanity and madness. And we are barely 2 weeks into the new year at the time that we are broadcasting this. And as I'm sure everybody has seen, America had like a little bootleg coup try to go down during the past week. And us being in the D.C. metro area, that was definitely interesting. Since I know for me, I was like on lunch break with my 9 to 5 and, seeing the news like, what the hell is going on? And people were basically wilding. And for me, and it's kind of interesting me seeing the response to this over the past few days, from everything from people I know to a national and international level. My feelings on everything that happened is kind of I'm not surprised. You know what I mean? Like, if you sit back and you observe certain stuff and you keep ignoring it after a while, that doesn't mean that the stuff that's happening isn't going to go down. And with what happened in D.C. at the Capitol, I know Trump is like the big, catalyst of why people are angry, but Trump is just like a tumor on what was already a steadily declining health of a country in terms of a sick body and a sick mindset. You know what I mean? Like,
That's right.
You know what I mean? Like, tumors are bad, but if you don't do preventative shit to try to avoid them tumors, what do you think's going to happen? You know what I'm saying? And
I think that was I think that's a good point. And that's where I was coming from in the very beginning, where I always saw Trump as a person that represented something other than himself, or a diverse group of individuals that had certain type of feelings. You know what I'm saying? And unfortunately, there's elements in that group that had gone to the extreme. Not to cut you off, Fusion, but when it was going down, I'm in the DMV now. And I wasn't in D.C. at the time when it was going down, but I was, and I didn't fear for a moment. Well, first of all, I thought it was theater. Because it just seemed too like, I think there were people involved that didn't know what was going on, but I think there were people involved that did know what was going on. Mm-hmm. And so it was kind of, I took it as almost theatrical, because I knew that with the weapon systems that you know about, with weapon systems you don't know about, that it wasn't going to go but so far. You know what I'm saying? It wasn't going to go but so far. So I had never had that fear that it was going to be. Well, that was mostly people who were inside the situation and inside that hall where the government people were at. They had a fear. But as a black man, I didn't. I knew it wasn't going to last long, and I knew it was, something I guess orchestrated in some ways to to I guess make it I guess a last bang as you leave, go out with a bang, so to speak. But I didn't necessarily, to me it was theatrical and and funny at the same time.
I think for me, right, like, I don't necessarily think that the government was going to be overthrown. Okay? Not because of the lack of people or effort, but because, quite frankly, this country is soft at the moment. Okay? Like, they've been talking about it. They're going to have this gathering or whatever for a long time, right? At this particular time, at that particular day that it happened. And they had a lot of people and stuff there. And as somebody who grew up in the D.C. metro area, shouts out PG County, shouts out Southeast D.C., et cetera, like, you're kind of used after a while to seeing that, people protest and do certain things, right? And I'm also, for better or for worse, used to seeing the hypocrisy of when certain groups do a protest and other groups do a protest. So when this joint went down, and I'll get into the theater part of what I think about this theater later on. When certain stuff went down and people were like surprised, I'm like, why are you surprised? Why are you surprised this is happening? Because this hypocrisy has always existed in this area. In other words, like, if you have something where it's black people or people of color or folks who are deemed politically leftist or protest, there's always more security. Like, one thing about the DC metro area is it is not lacking law enforcement on a civilian or military level, right?
No doubt.
So, for example, in 2016, I was at the inauguration protest. Relatively peaceful situation. When cops wanted to get out there, they were there quick, fast, in a hurry. We're talking about state and feds, because one of the things that people have to remember, or people who may be overseas perhaps, DC is not a state. Washington, D.C. has its own little thing going on. So you will usually have federal folks. You will have folks within the, District of Columbia locality. And then you have tons of military here. Like, you have, Air Force, Army, et cetera, et cetera. So that'll be folks that are included in Maryland and Virginia. Okay? When certain stuff happens. And then, on top of the fact that you have different types of security, private and government, depending on where you're at and around the area that you're at. So when you have people, starting to climb around and get buck or whatever, it's like, to me, the only thing that stops stuff from getting more extra than it already did, because, there are people who are injured, there are, folks who are dead, etc., is the fact that it was disorganized. Because if we want to keep it all the way live, part of this was an inside job, but it was a disorganized inside job. Because, again, for somebody who grew up in this area, even when, as a young head, right, you would have to go through metal detectors and stuff to go to Smithsonian. Or various other government buildings. Like, stuff got a little more extra after 9/11 in terms of bag checks, etc. But you're not getting into certain places if you don't have a certain level of clearance or somebody is not letting you in. Mm-hmm. With the Capitol situation, and nobody can tell me a goddamn thing about that, you wouldn't have had one Negro try to climb over some damn fence, much less scale the Capitol, push around cops, do everything else, and it not have been a bloodbath. It would have been a massacre with the stuff people did. But the way people were doing things, and people have seen the pictures and video or whatever else, you had some of those cops, not all of them, and I'm going to get to that in a minute, you had some of them cops posing with those cats who burst up in there. And we're talking about cats who burst up in there, some folks are on there for a lark, because, that's what happens with some people's protests, they just want to be there like, I was there, you know what I'm saying? That's part of the reason why shit didn't get to a certain place. For those who were serious about it, like, only a few things left it to the point where I don't think a congressperson or whatever would have gotten, hurt or murked, Because, again, a lot of people, a lot of situations happen. But then you gotta look at the behavior of the people who came into the Capitol, right? Like, some people came in there bug, but you had people who were just there like, we're raiding the Capitol. And they're walking through velvet ropes. Who the fuck raid stuff and they walking through velvet ropes? Orderly. And in line, you know what I mean? When you look at certain things that went down and occurred, like, you had a bunch of people who were just there like, I'm quote unquote for the revolution, but they posting shit on like Twitter and Parlay and Instagram, etc. They posing. They running around making sure they get the best shots. Those cats only took it so serious. They kind of wanted to stunt, basically. Like, look at me and look at what I'm doing. And the folks who might have been a bit more serious about it, like, I know there was a brother who was a cop. I think he ended up saving them Congress people. And the thing that jacked up is, I think the only reason that particular part occurred was the thing that always has existed in America in terms of the poison of racism. Those cats probably wanted to go and hurt that black dude.
Mm-hmm.
And him distracting those people at that time ended up saving a whole bunch of cats. But when you look at the pictures of the cops who were posing, I ain't see no black cops posing with those folks. You know what you saw. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And when you sit back and look at all of this type of situation, I think there was a theater, but it wasn't so much of the people who went in there and did their thing. Like they were thinking, like a bunch of those cats were thinking small scale. I think the theater that offended me was what happened afterwards, right? When you had all these congressmen who were talking buck and talking all this shit, they all of a sudden want to try to be calm and unifying after the shit came to their door. In other words, America has had certain parts that have been a mess for a minute. We've had certain state houses, like especially with Michigan and all of them, had people come up there and protest and do whatever else. Some people armed, some people didn't. When it came to the Capitol and they asses were on the line and people had to put on gas masks, all of a sudden it wasn't fun when the rabbit had the gun, right? Because they thought they could control the rabbits. They thought everything was all good as long as they could sit on the podium and, you know, talk smack and get people hype and, you know, that could help them like raise funds for money or do whatever else. Long as they were safe, it was cool. But you had some of them folks up there yelling and screaming about, you know, they're going to hang the vice president. They're going to like force people to do A, B, C, D, or E in Congress. They had to put on gas masks and stuff and, you know, be out to like, you know, I guess the little hidden like security areas or whatever. All of a sudden after all that happened, like a few hours later when this, you know, stuff seemed to calm down, all of a sudden it's like, oh, we got to be, you know, unified and push against this and A, B, C, D, or E. I think that's the theater that's insulting because I'm like, I'm not a fan of Trump at all. You know what I mean? I'm not a fan of this administration at all. But I'm like, it's very interesting that there was no pushback towards anything. And for some of these cats, there was no, let's go through a official election the way we are supposed to until they asses were in danger. And I think that should be the thing because when the second that happened, Congress got in motion real quick. They didn't get in motion that fast for COVID. They didn't get in motion that, we know they didn't get in motion that fast for the stimulus. There's millions of people who are still unemployed. There's a ton of stuff that's still happening. But the second they asses got in danger, all of a sudden, we want to make big, grand speeches and look like, you know, everything's all good. And I'm talking about both sides of the aisle. I mean, of course, I think the GOP is way more prevalent in this, but we got to remember there's folks on the other side who, you know, they talk pretty or whatever else, but they didn't really try to protect the citizenry. As long as they were good, everything was straight. And one of the things that we're seeing right now with some of this theater that's happening is because people don't want to have stuff fall apart because, you know, let's keep it 100. This is not a godly country. It's a secular nation, that's fine, but this is not a godly country. And one of the things that people got scared of after all of this type of stuff went down, and let's keep it 100, coups don't really make a whole bunch of people money. Because that makes things that are already in an unstable situation more unstable. What you have happening right now is a few people had a tax of conscience. I think a few did. But I think the majority, the second the Lords of Capital started talking, like them big banks and them other companies talking about, if you supported this bullshit or weren't trying to, you know, have this electoral college thing go down, we're going to take away your ends. All of a sudden, some people are talking really nice. They're talking very nicely, you know what I mean? Because their livelihoods got messed with. They didn't care about the public. I think, honestly, if there was like a company who felt like they were going to be, what was the company that does the suits? Who used to roll for the Nazis? Was that Brooks Brothers? No, Hugo Boss. I'm sorry,
Yeah,
Hugo Boss. Hugo Boss used to make the suits for the Nazis back in the day.
Okay.
Like, if you had companies like that, or, you know, back in the day, Ford or whatever, before World War II went down, they thought that the money wasn't going to be messed with. I don't think a certain thing would have happened a particular way it is right now. Like, Trump is an evil dude, but Trump is going to be the easiest sacrifice I think these people are going to make to try to maintain their status quo. And I think that's what people had to be on the lookout for, because we got to remember the old normal led to this. I think sometimes when people look at, who's not in the White House, that certain things going to make a 180. Not necessarily so. Like, the best case scenario is that stuff gets back to, quote unquote, the old normal that wasn't great for a whole lot of us. And I think it's going to be a little harder to get to that, much less anything above and beyond. Like, with the coup, I'm not necessarily shook at the fact. I mean, I'm happy that, of course I'm happy that it got smushed or whatever, because, black folks have never functioned well under fascism. We can say what we will about American politics, etc., but internationally, black folks and fascism don't mix.
Yep. Right.
So I look at shit in that aspect. I know some people be like, this is white people shit. I'm just there like, unfortunately, we're kind of in that mix right now. We're in a post-colonialist era. We got to deal with that.
Well, as far as myself is concerned, from at least the late 80s to the 90s, I have had an idea in the early 90s, and now it as time has progressed, I can see things a little different without necessarily having to study the political aspect or world control aspect as much as more or less I used to. But I think at the end of the day, for me, it has always been, I never had an optimism about who was in that White House. So I didn't have an optimism when Obama came in. Didn't have optimism about Clinton, So, I mean, so the lead up of jokers who most of us would say were better than the current, I had really no optimism about that. So by the time Trump came in, it was just a part of, he represented another arm of financiers and people who we probably will never see on TV. He represents another string of those people we haven't necessarily seen, and obviously he represents some people who we have seen. And I guess a mouthpiece, I guess, of the old normal, as she was talking about. As an individual, I don't necessarily feel ashamed that I said anything about Homeboy that wasn't negative. In other words, I come from the standpoint where there's nobody who's going to be in the office is going to completely help black people. So therefore, it's probably going to come from a more economic and or spiritual avenue that black people are going to get, something substantial out of that. Of course, it's going to be something political because certain things have come down the pike that have helped black people, orchestrated by black people who are in government. Adam Clayton Powell, of course, being one. But who is in the White House? Is more or less, like I've said on this show before. A person in the White House to me always represented kind of like a baby, and a baby in a baby carriage. The president has his seat, and the baby has his seat in the baby carriage. The baby carriage doesn't push itself around. It's not motorized. It means it's pushed by bigger people. A lot of times we normally think of bigger people, we think of finance, but bigger in the sense of world control, world manipulation, and things of that nature. And in other words, I'm not only to me politics, like I said before, is more or less the local politics. Because it's more of the hope that things go good. Because there's so many people on the take, there's so many people getting paid. To look a certain way, look or not look a certain way. Then on the top of people not necessarily want to look bad in a certain way, or take a chance, or even be, bold about something. So, it's a mix of emotions. And it's like, as a black man in America, or as a black man on planet Earth, in this dispensation, this point in human history, I'm like, if I don't have God, if I don't recognize God at my core, and that everything about me, nothing human beings really did do amongst themselves, we can have sex, but it's up to the Most High whether there is a child or not. Nobody does anything within themselves to bring this about. That's just something that comes about. So, I mean, what else? The life force, what else can you? I mean, everything is up and down, ebbs and flows. I mean, of course, politics is like that. So, Republican, Democrat, this and that, to me, after a while, especially after learning certain things that, I mean, most of these people are being, all governments are manipulated or from the very beginning by people who had money. Because when America was first established, it was mostly rich families that came, and some of these rich families that came are, have offspring that are still around today. So, and that's not to mention the ones that are overseas, or the new people who have gotten money since then. Or, you know what I'm saying? So, different secret societies, different, a lot of these people marry amongst themselves. You know what I'm saying? So we're talking about the world outside, or outside the presidency. And also the presidency don't have the highest security code clearance. That should tell motherfuckers something right there. That means that the president can't even get information about extraterrestrials. Well, he don't have a higher security clearance to get that information. So that means there's somebody else. And not only that, just information that has a certain security clearance. So that means that there's certain information. If the president doesn't have a higher security clearance, that means that he don't run the show. He's, like I said, a baby in a baby carriage being pushed around by bigger people who have higher security clearances and don't necessarily want you to know about, mankind being possibly linked up, to do evil things, amongst themselves or with people who are not human. So, I don't believe. I think people should have more optimism in themselves, God, and their family, and have like I said, more of a local political thing going on. And I mean, that's just me. I just, there's a lot of show smoke and mirrors going on, and and COVID is the latest consequence or outgrowth of that.
I mean, I definitely think the thing is, like, when people look at this type of thing, like, I think a lot of the theater I think it's always been very prevalent. I think during the Trump era, right up to the coup, it's been extremely prevalent, right? Like, the stuff that makes people move their ass is usually them feeling that they're going to be in physical or financial danger, who are in certain places and positions of power, And when this stuff went down, they felt the physical. Because, again, people have been, especially over the past year, right? Like, stuff has been happening always, all through my life, right? And probably beyond my physical life. But when you look at all of this type of stuff, people in power usually don't expect people to come up to their door. Much less, threaten violence or whatever else. They might be there like, oh, they're yelling behind the fence or they're doing whatever else. Big fucking deal, right? And we already know in this country there are definitely, jacked up racial and other socioeconomic hierarchies that go down here. A bunch of these rich white folks, let's keep it 100, then they expect a bunch of poor white folks to roll up on them and start talking shit and threatening violence. Okay? And when we get right down to certain things, whether you're pro or anti-capitalism or whatever, when you do stuff that starts fucking with people's money, there's a problem. And for these cats who are used to being way more comfortable than the average, you and me, like, let's keep it real. The vast majority of people in this country don't make six figures. A bunch of people in this country barely make mid 5 figures. And that's a whole other conversation for another day, in terms of like people getting compensated properly for work or whatever. You add in that mix, not just unemployment, not just COVID, but imbalances that have existed for a very long time and frustrations. People react to frustrations in different ways. If you want to keep it very, very real, like some of these folks have lost their damn minds in this past year in the age of COVID because of not just years of those particular pressures that have happened, but the fact that certain stuff has changed where people had the illusion that certain things were going to make them successful. Like the entire American exceptionalism thing doesn't just affect black people, POC, LGBTQ folks, etc. It affects white men and white women. And a lot of those folks don't want to admit that. Because even if you have a security blanket that's full of moms, use that security blanket, right? Like, if I pull myself up by my bootstraps and I tell these other folks who ain't like me, fuck you or whatever, I can succeed. And everything's going to work out just fine. Like, that's honestly the core of mostly American exceptionalism and, like, American selfishness and individualism. Like, the quote-unquote rugged individualism thing. COVID, for some people, and that might have been the first time in their life, that shit wiped them on their ass, right? On top of the fact of the type of individual who's usually worshipped in this country is a rich white individual. Usually a rich white man. And for these past years, that's been Trump. Because let's face it, he's been able to get away with a lot of stuff throughout his life. He's older than my mama. He's been able to get away with a lot of stuff. Okay? And you have all this anger plus misplaced pride. You only have one or two directions to go into. You either have the direction of, wow, I got to let all this type of stuff go and change because even though that's might be different, this ain't working. Or you're holding on even tighter to the thing that might be hurting you. And what we saw with the coup was a lot of people holding on to the thing that's hurting them because it almost hurts too much to admit that you're wrong. I believe that Trump and the GOP have, genuine believers and all of that. They've existed and they probably always will. But you have a lot of folks who are pushing back because they don't want to admit they fucked up. It's hard as a human being to admit that you fucked up, right? Like, we all go through it. We all have our sense of pride or whatever else. But when you do a big screw up, you only have one or two options, especially if you're an adult. You know what I mean? We're not talking about teenage years or even maybe like early 20s. You had a bunch of whole-ass adults go up in there and essentially pitch a bitch fit because of, what they've been dealing with is wrong and it came in their face, right? Like, the election was a small part of it because, again, if you want to keep very honest, Trump and them other folks did everything possible to cheat and still got their ass beat. You know what I mean? And you have a lot of people who, and we've seen this happen throughout multiple cycles, throughout multiple leaderships, not just presidents and so forth, all over the world, myths, etc., that when a false god goes down, you have a bit of the populace that is able to move on. You have a bit of the populace that don't know what the fuck to do with themselves. And that's what we're going through now. And while this particular insurgency has been pushed back on for now, and I think the universe just set it up that certain way, I just really hope that people don't get comfortable, because after old boy goes, somebody else is going to try to fill them shoes. And honestly, not just him, because I don't believe he's no big genius. I think he has charisma or certain other stuff, but he's not no big genius. There's going to be a more competent team that's going to push the nonsense.
No, definitely.
That's the big thing to be concerned about. Because, if we got to keep it very, very real, he has truly been, I would say, like, I think most people have a figureheadish thing besides, in terms of the balance of power. But some people exercise it more than others and flex it more than others. We got to remember that Trump wouldn't have never gotten as far as he did if certain people didn't back him up on the Lords of Capital end and also the government ends. And only because I think a bunch of those cats were selfish and unfocused, shit didn't go 1,000 times worse than it already is. And it's not great now. The next round of people got to be on their toes. We can't be there like, and I certainly hope that Biden and them get in there and they, reverse a whole bunch of the nonsense. But you can't get comfortable. That's my worry, because somebody who's smarter, maybe younger, maybe older, they're taking notes. They're taking notes, and they're learning, because, like, in all honesty, we can either have this type of thing just be like a bad blip in the system, or this shit could become Reconstruction Part 2. And we're still dealing with the after effects of the bullshit of Reconstruction. And I hope a lot of people realize that.
No doubt, no doubt. Like with most things, I think, in propaganda and I guess in government, there's always going to be something that, in other words, no human being is 100% bad. You know, because was on here and I had made mention of the fact that I agreed with the fact that he had pointed out the fact of certain people being killed, you know, I think it was related to, I think blacks, or well, not necessarily blacks, but, you know, some related to certain blacks being, not blacks, but people being killed, Americans being killed, you know, related to things by the border. And something related to that, you know what I'm saying, that, or certain families that who had, you know, who he had tried to make some type of redress for certain families who had gone for that. Now, we can't really be mad at him for doing that, you know. You know, I mean, you know, there's some grandiose things maybe, but America has always been a place where people could come to be able to, you know, to do certain things and to, you know, to make a better life. I mean, I think everybody understands that. You know, I think, and also, you know, so I could understand why there, you know, and also there's the last 10 years, there's been a uptick of women being killed in Mexico. And it's interesting in mainstream media in the States, that's not really talked about. Me and Fusion have talked about that. And so people wanting to leave that area, you know, the more I learned, the more I had more understanding, you know what I'm saying? So I could definitely understand that, you know what I'm saying? It's just in most cases, and, you know, just like in situations that I've seen, it's just individuals have concerns about, well, how will black people be affected by that? You know, because a lot of times black people won't necessarily say, particularly black people who live maybe back east, you know, where it's taken as like, well, I'm not opposed to that, but at the same time, you know, I know certain black people are affected in the sense of jobs. You know what I'm saying? Now, certain black people are not affected, but some black people don't even care. But, you know, that's a reality. So I think that's, you know, an aspect that I think could have drawn people in, you know what I'm saying, to what some of the things that Trump was saying, because certain people had concerns about that. You know what I'm saying? Just from what I've known and my personal experience is that, you know, a lot of cases it'll be the males and the females that get along. In other words, the females from another group with males from another group. That's normally a lot of times how it goes down. It's not really like a whole scale acceptance. You know what I'm saying? And I think in some ways, you know, he tapped into that, you know, in the sense of like, you know, people's concerns about, you know, just, you know, like, well, you know, and he didn't get into the aspect of, I think, some of the incentives that were given to Hispanics weren't necessarily given to certain African or Black Caribbeans. You know what I'm saying? As far as, driver's license, just things that people especially get in the DMV area. You know, I don't remember those type of things being in the same way towards, at least the ones that people I knew, Black Caribbeans that I knew. So, you know, I was just wondering about, well, you know, it doesn't seem like, but, you know, that's that was mine. That wasn't something obviously that, you know, Homeboy was talking about. But like I said in the beginning that, you know, I didn't vote for Trump. You know, I grew up with Trump in the sense of me coming up in the New Jersey, New York area. I had heard about Trump as a child. and I guess in the things he was doing, and see, the thing is with the Central Park jogger and Trump, putting them people down, putting the cats down who didn't do it. I especially understood after like the early '90s, after I had understood certain things different, why he would have made that comment. He was in bed with them. Goldman Sachs, the Central Park jogger worked for Goldman Sachs. That was, a major banking house, particularly at that time, and in New York. So, I mean, I knew, and I'm like, he was a player in New York. So it's like, 1 + 1 = 2. That's somebody he's making money with or funneling money through. So obviously he was going to say that that's what most people do when they're making money with people, and he probably hammed it on or said a lot more because in the sense of he probably needed or owed them. So, that was just more or less of that in the sense of people speaking blindly about certain issues or whatever. But, I'm glad that I learned the stuff I learned in the early '90s, and makes me want to get into some of it again, in some ways to give me some kind of clarity and to understand that, I'm not saying for people not to vote, but I just see politicians, like, to me, when these people rolled up in there, they didn't roll up on rich white people. People in government ain't rich white folks. They are paid for by rich. There might be a couple of them that got some money, but they ain't really technically rich white folks, or the rich white folks that, white people are very layered. There's a layer of rich white folk that we will never see on TV. You know what I'm saying? So, and then there's maybe ones that people hear about, there's ones that live, because, the DMV has some of the more richer white people in America. So if I'm correct, DMV, like the Boston area, certain parts of the West Coast, and certain parts of the Midwest, of course. There's some of the, but the DMV, but then there's layers of people we don't, So, I mean, I don't know. I mean, at the end of the day, my more concern is about, everybody being treated fairly, you know what I'm saying? Black people not being necessarily having to be second to anyone, based upon the history that Black people in America shouldn't have to be second to anyone. With the exception of Native Americans. The further you go back into their history, they're Black people. So, they're just an offspring of people who had got mixed over the last 1,000 years, 2,000 years. So, but they were Black folks. So with the exception of Native Americans, and then everybody else after that, and that should be understood, as far as I'm concerned, for anybody on this planet. You know what I'm saying? I'm not saying, not whatever, but nah, and of course there's certain African Americans who are or Black people who are not necessarily doing what they should be doing. And, and that, because we definitely not taking care of our families the way we should be. And we definitely do. We indulge in too much criminal enterprise, and those things are, those mentalities are not the remedies of a thriving or standing, long-lasting civilization.
Well,
they're not.
Well, I'm gonna definitely look at some of this type of stuff like this. Like, you brought up an interesting factor in terms of the rich folks and the rich folks, right? Like, when I bring up the entire Lords of Capital thing with people, I'm talking about those folks. Because, in a weird way, the Congress people and, even certain folks in certain levels of government, they're like the reachable rich people that we think about. You know what I'm saying? Or people who might be movie stars or whatever. Exactly. And then with government, right? Because to me, I'll just be very short for people who aren't used to listening to us or whatever. I think us living is political. You know what I'm saying? Whether we ascribe ourselves with different labels or not, being Black in America and living, you had to deal with politics whether you fucking like it or not on certain levels in different ways. That being said, like, we look at the Congress people and, president, vice president, etc. But who funds those guys? Those are the folks one had to look at deeply, because when we look at certain things with this again, the people who control those people are like, something's being messed with a little too bad. And we can't deal with that. You know what I mean? Like, matter of fact, God, what's that dude in Las Vegas who just died? Like Addison, Silver or whatever. Like, he's a dude who funds a whole lot of like Republican people or whatever, and he asked for ages. That dude died relatively recently. Pardon me if I'm saying his name wrong. I just noticed that news story today. Like, those people, you got to look at like those, or like the Mercers or other people like that who funded this latest round of GOP people, like the Koch brothers and other folks like that, right? And there's people on, both sides of, the major political parties who do that, but those are just some of the main examples of people who I can think of in terms of, if you aren't, like, necessarily a political junkie or, like, a high reader, like I read, like, a whole lot, you're not necessarily hearing those names or seeing those names if you're not reading certain things. And you gotta be here like, well, who the hell are these people? Or it's just that, like, if these cats are supposed to be, like, I guess low-tail millionaire to, like, high six-figure people, the folks who have those money labels beyond that are a certain way. Like, everybody's not going to necessarily be like homeboy who's Amazon or whatever. But a lot of those people who are pulling the strings of other rich people, like, it gets really deeper into a whole bunch of stuff. You know what I mean? And when we look at stuff like that, like, we can look at these other individuals and be like, they're corrupt or corrupted. And it's very true. But who's corrupting the corruptors? You know what I'm saying? Like, who's trying to make sure a certain status quo stays a certain status quo? It's usually not the regular people on the ground. The regular people on the ground may reinforce certain things. But certain cats don't want you to get to a certain, point or a certain level. Like, if we had to re-bring up the stimulus situation, it's like, if you look at some of these things, like, why are you so goddamn mad about somebody getting a little bit of extra money to get by? Like, stuff for them that would be pocket change, that would be like 25 cents to them. Like, why are you so fucking mad about somebody, like, getting a G or two to survive? Or be a little better off, or to pay something off or whatever else? Because that makes you think about the entire system. You know what I mean? For some folks, they were really thinking about how their system functioned until Corona happened. And they lost jobs. Or people got sick, and, they're looking at the folks beforehand. We're talking about, we've been telling you that this shit is some bullshit. More people started taking that seriously. Like, Black America has always been that conscious of America, as far as I'm concerned. Where we're like, yo, this system is fucked up. You ain't getting paid a certain way. We're being treated really weird. They're trying to divide us. And most of the time people tell us to shut the fuck up, right? Or you're exaggerating. Or, it's not that big of a deal, or this thing was a particular exception. It's like, we told you law enforcement's fucked up. We told you the government is fucked up. Not saying that there aren't good people in these places, but we gotta look at things on a systemic level. Black America has always been that conscious, trying to tell people that systemically, this shit ain't it. And some people are just realizing that for the very first time. They only want people to realize that so much. Like, when people started seeing these health disparities, because, of course, Black America has always dealt with health disparities to the public health.
No
when this
doubt
COVID,
about that.
but you know what I mean? But when COVID went down, all of a sudden you had people dealing with what we've been dealt with for a long time. And some people don't know how to deal with that. So they had to find a different way to rebel. You know what I'm saying? Like, to rebel against the government seems to be a big thing, but to, storm Target not wearing a mask is the shit that people think they can control, right? Or whatever. Partially because they might not necessarily know what to aim at, which is a lot of people. I think most of us have been there sometime in our lives, right? But because they don't want to admit that everything they believed in ain't right. This rich white dude told you that not to worry about it, but you're not supposed to remember that they're a rich white dude. And they got access to certain stuff that you don't. You know what I mean? And if your concept of freedom is so limited that you just think being free is being an asshole to somebody else, you don't know how to do something collectively. It might not want to know how to do something collectively that doesn't help just out yourself, but helps out other people. Even if it's just the concept of feeling better about yourself. COVID is just a thing where everyone's like, you only have so much control over that. But something like a system that has not really been trying to help you out, or they try to limit your help, Attacking that wasn't a particular thing. It's easier to be there like, I'm going to just follow this dude, man or woman. You know what I'm saying? Instead of being there like, I don't only have my own mind, but I care about other people. Like, the bugged out thing about all this situation to me isn't the fact that people are mad at the government. I mean, there's plenty of reason to be mad at the government. It's the fact that after all this time, in the age of information and everything else that we have, in the age where we got so many specific things we can go for, the biggest thing you chose was to put yourself behind not just a person, but a person who has been loud about not giving a fuck about nobody, including their own kids. You know what I mean? Like, or their own team. Because when I look at the coup situation, or like, you know, it is a coup. Let's not talk about insurrection, all this other PR shenanigans. Shit was a bootleg coup. If it happened in Latin America or Africa, you would call it a coup. Or Asia, right? What bugs me out... Yeah. You know, what's the most bugged out thing about all of this is not the anger or madness, whether you call it legit or illegitimate, but the fact that nobody really went behind the cause. It was just this person. Because we can say all this other things about these other countries, but usually those people would have had a little more behind them than that. This was really just, it was almost like, I don't know if you ever heard the term of LARPing, but essentially like LARPing is like live action role play. It was essentially a bootleg LARP for revolution, right? Because if you wanted revolution, you would have done more shit than you did. You wouldn't have been going back to the hotels in DC and popping shit on social media. You know what I mean? And doing other stuff. I mean, it's a big range of people. Because I know people like talking about, like, you know, the Hicks and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. As we've seen on the news, there's been all kinds of folks who did it, including people who, you know, used to be in the Olympics, including folks who are literally politicians in their own states. Folks who own businesses on multiple level, you know, regular yokels and all that. Like, yes, you had the alt-right people, the quote-unquote alt-right people and racists, et cetera, et cetera. But you had a lot of people who were literally just doing it, like, they were the opposite of what I saw at the Women's March, right? Where people were just there like, ooh, this is, like, they almost treated, like, this shit like it was fun. Like, I went on a march, I took some pics, it was fun. It wasn't like, you know, yo, your life and other people's lives are really on the line, you know? And, I don't know, man.
Yeah,
like
that
shit kind of blows me, you know. Mm-hmm.
I mean, that was one thing that I had forgot about. That under that banner, there are groups who are not racist, and there are groups who are kind of more or less questioning the government on certain levels. And because I remember hearing some cats say something on the internet. People I know who I don't personally know, but I know of us being researchers, and you know, certain people who are similar to stuff that I say. Most of those people weren't black, but I just knew of some of them who were white, who I noticed who had made mention of certain things, and it seemed like I said, okay, so there's an idea that, you know, that through that there was going to be a positive change in a sense, but you know, like, however, in most situations, there's always going to be the good and the bad, you know, and the bad aspect, as far as for I as a black man, would have been them having, you know, animosity towards, you know, any racial group, really, particularly black folk, and you know. Normally, and also, a lot of times when that comes, and historically we see that you know, that changes the dynamic of a lot of times male and female relationships, because in the climate of racism, we are also dealing with more division between male and female. And I think, and more animosity and anger. And I think, you know, I don't want to blame racism completely for that, but racism definitely and truly had a hand in it. Mm-hmm. You know, and so that's the aspect of I guess that movement if they're pushing that, because ultimately they're pushing, if they're pushing racism towards, people of color, particularly black people, they're essentially pushing against, male and female, not and individually and them being together. But it's bigger than that also because, I'm of the school that, racism at its heart wants, us to be, I guess the automaton human robot that, has no more emotion and that, is only, and in a lot of ways, there are some black people who are like that, I think for me, COVID has revealed who believes in God and who don't. In some ways, for me, because I'm not going to be scared about it. I'm not going to be, especially since I know I know a teaspoon about nutrition. And that's enough for me to be like, oh. And then, I think something is going on that we are not sure about. People can believe what they want to believe, but I think there's I, as a black man, knowing what has happened, like in the book Medical Apartheid mentions, and even before I even read that book, I had known about some of the manipulation that takes place for and towards black bodies or human bodies in general, there were, in the Nazi concentration camps, that was a large swell of people that they could, test on, and in a sense, we're dealing with that now, in the sense of these different groups bidding and they're getting paid to be able to give people vaccines, and half of the people are not even going to need them. There's some people that don't even, some people who are working, and some people are in situations where they don't. I was talking with a joker the other day, and it's funny how when you talk with people and their voices change, and they get authoritative about things that they see on TV. He said, "Well, I'm not dealing with hypotheticals, and that's not even brother's voice. I'm not dealing with hypotheticals, They said this and that. They said this. I'm like, well, but brother, that's what they told you. How do you know they not lying?" He said, hold on. It was funny because I had saw the brother later, and I was like, all right, man. He was like, He just normally say, all right, bro, and then was like, He was like, I said, I'm like, what, bro? You can believe what you want to believe, bro. You can believe that. That's just not what I believe. That's not what I know. And if you want to go ahead and go through with all that, that's what you want to do. But I just I thought it was comical that that at the end of the day that this thing was really going to really mind fuck mostly just the people, because there's going to be people who are going to be scared even when they get vaccines. People are going to be are just disjointed from just the way they should be and the way they were. That it's going to be a while before it gets back to the way it was. It's going to be a while. I think it's going to be years.
I think the interesting thing that you brought up is how you just see what people believe in and don't believe in. When you brought up that particular concept, and I think that honestly, whether you believe in spirituality or no, is a very strong thing I agree with in terms of that concept. I look at this past year right up to this coup situation in terms of how selfish some people can be and how non-selfish they can be, right? Because if you look at the core of everything, like COVID, I'm just bring that up because that was the example that you brought up. I'm like, if you had the situation where you had people just there, because if we want to look at the very beginning of all this, what were you asked to do before a vaccine? Put a mask on when you go out and into crowds, right? Like a little facial mask, and wash your hands. That was what you were asked to do. Like, don't get into too many big groups, but if you do, please do these things. If you're around people who, might be older or immunocompromised or whatever, try to be a little more on point. Clean up a little bit. You see how many people lost their shit when that just happened? They lost their shit because it wasn't just about them. Because even if you don't believe that COVID is on a certain level, if wearing a face mask going to CVS makes somebody else feel better, what is the harm in that? Because you're not wearing it all the time. Most gigs aren't wearing it all the time. Like, I know that some jobs have it more than others. Like, I know my little cousin, for example, he works for an Amazon warehouse, right? Or whatever. And with that, they go through the full 9 mask, they get the temperature checks every day, all that type of shit. You know what I mean? Like, that stuff they got on their particular shit. I know folks who are essential workers in different places, whether you're talking about, medical, grocery, etc. They got to wear day joints. You know what I mean? And, maybe gloves or whatever else. But at a certain period, you don't got to wear that joint no more. And that's it. Most people aren't dealing with that. Most folks might be dipping to McDonald's, might run in there real quick, grab their shit and be out. You know what I mean? Or, run to the, whatever your grocery store is of choice or whatever, do that and be out. And you look at where this country is right now and some of the other places where they had that shit a little more on lock, whether it was, via personal responsibility, community responsibility, and or government or both, and see where some of these places are at. Like, China had this whole other shit going on. You know what I mean? But you got certain places where those cats, besides the mask, are functioning like regular, normal joints. They having music festivals and shit. They cooling. And, I don't think you can have indoor dining in D.C. yet. I know in Maryland, it's severely reduced. You know what I mean? Because a bunch of motherfuckers, if you want to be really real about it, a bunch of cats chose not to do those things. But at the same time, some people are like, because of government, whatever. I'm like, you're going to trust the same government in terms of shooting up with a vaccine. That's wild new. Like, you wouldn't rather not do those other little things, but you're going to trust the government that you yell and scream about that is terrible to jab you with two doses of a vaccine. Because you just couldn't stand the concept of doing something for somebody that wasn't you. You know what I mean? And that's just wild because we got to keep it really real. If there was a communal basis in terms of certain things from the government on down, if the government cared about community, they would at least try to do what Canada's doing. Like, I know peoples who just became, dual citizens in Canada. They got 2 G-checks like the regular Canadian citizens have per month to try to stay their ass at home if they can. And to get by and pay their bills or whatever. And I'm not saying that 2 G's is like the biggest, most wonderful amount, especially if you got like, bigger families or whatever. But that's better than, people having to fight for, damn near a year and a half for like a funky $1,800 in comparison. One time. You know what I mean? But people didn't think about protesting about that because that meant they would have to care about other people besides them. People, weren't thinking about if I do A, B, C, D, or E, we can all, remember at the beginning of, 2020, folks were like, if we do this shit for 3 months, we'd be able to go back to a semi-version of normal. But you saw all these folks protesting. You know what I'm saying? You saw all these folks protesting that. They protested, think about it, yo. They protested washing their hands. And putting on a mask to go to the store. Because freedom, right? But this other stuff is fine. But that's because they had to think of other people. So when you look at certain stuff that's happened, like, it just tells you how much people want to think about others, including their own families, because, at this juncture, we've already heard enough stories about people being there like, I ain't going to do A, B, C, or E. And, whether you want to believe it's COVID, the universe, or both, they got sick. They fam got sick. People they care about got sick. Some folks died, But still, in some people's head, it's just they're like, nah, I ain't going to do whatever. It's like, but what's the point of that? You know what I mean? And with this, government situation, again, the government's jacked up, but it's like, you were able, well, let me put it like this. You were able to get into a place that hasn't really been fucked with like that since the War of 1812. And what was your goal? It wasn't for other people, to come up and rise or do whatever else politically. It was because you felt that a dude who lost should have won. By the rules that your people set up. You know what I mean? I just think that if you already haven't had your mind in a certain place right now, and if it's not already on a better path now, and I hate to say it because, like, I'm a person who always believes in hope, you know? I'm more of an optimist than whatever else. I'm not a utopian person anymore, but I'm still a bit of an optimist. But I think after all this stuff that's occurred, you know, if you look at somebody across your table and you've been around them for a minute and they still acting fucked up, you might have to, you know, start cutting off some ties. Because a lot of stuff is very blatant right now. Like, some stuff, for some people, has been more blatant than others. But when you look at certain things, like if you look at the coup attempt here, and you saw that people were trying to, you know, damn near lynch that black cop, but you had white cops posing with the people who were coming through, but you still want to deny that racial shit is a thing, I don't think it can be helped. You know? I think that if you are more mad at people protesting police brutality, not just on black folks, Latinos, etc., but including on some white people, because we've had these stories where white people had the shit beat out of them by a cop. They ain't do shit. Or shot or killed. And you're still trying to protect a system that protects, you know, murderers behind a badge. You might not be able to be helped, you know. If you like yelling support the troops until the troops aren't about the bullshit you're about, maybe you got to look at something else. You know what I mean? Or if you're like mad at the troops for asking for stuff like, you know, they want to have more help from the VA or whatever, and you're trying to call them greedy, you know. You don't want your kids to be dumb, but, you know, you don't want teachers to be protected to teach them back in the school buildings, you know, or get paid a certain way. Like, you're seeing certain stuff where I'm like, the people like always using that Maya Angelou quote in terms of, you know, if somebody shows, you know, you who they are, believe them. We're very loudly in that era. And if you have a social media feed, you already seen that some people are just naturally assholes. Some folks do it as an act, but a lot of people, that's just who they are. And you got to make some very, very loud and very, very strong decisions, not just for your sanity, but for the sanity and protection of those who are your loved ones and cared ones. You know, all human beings are a work in progress if you choose to be. A lot of people aren't choosing to be it. You just got to really look at that right now and make some very strong decisions. And when we talk about this type of stuff, if you haven't listened to our show before, nobody here is pro Democrat. Nobody here is pro GOP. Our political viewpoints and spiritual viewpoints are way beyond those labels. You know what I mean?
That's right.
But what you got to look at in terms of,
I'm at the same time, I feel just briefly that, you know, regardless of who says whatever, I'm going to be fair with the person. You know what I'm saying? Because in the beginning, many people were saying stuff about Trump, and I was like, well, you know, besides the fact I know about him coming up as a kid, you know, I'm like, I'm gonna give homeboy a chance, you know. And also, he had a lot of people. He had people in the infrastructure who were against him. He had people in the CIA. He had people in the FBI. Just people in certain organizations who had traditionally had a problem with certain black progressive people. I'm like, okay, so how he got a problem with them, but them had a problem with black progressive people? So certain parallels I thought that existed with homeboy that I thought were interesting. I was like, well, you know, that certain things just can't be ignored, you know what I'm saying, in that regard. So, you know, I'm just a person that's going to at least, you know, I've always been that way. It didn't matter if the group said whatever. I was going to get an odd view for myself and then take it from there, because people will lead you astray. That's political people, and that's also gangs. You know, will lead you astray into a place you shouldn't go to, where when you become adults, you put foolishness aside.
No doubt. I mean, in the day, people are about those who have common sense. You know what I mean? I will give credit where credit is due. You know, and sometimes it's not going to be under the people who I might necessarily label a certain way or view a certain way until a certain action happens. That being said, we're seeing a lot of various actions that have gone down and have happened, and there's either a thing about facing the reality that we're currently living on this rock or ignoring it, you know. When we have certain stuff, like right now, we're seeing a lot of spin, you know, post this coup. We're barely a week past it, you know what I mean? Which is kind of wild. We're just there like, oh yeah, so mid last week, shit was kind of wild, right? We're in that world right now. It is what it is. But if you quote unquote believe in democracy, you should have been cool with what went down. You know what I mean? Not because, again, I think the government is wonderful and everybody's all hunky-dory and, you know, these are my people. But because that shit was out of control and it wasn't going to make it any better for anybody who was here, except literally maybe some of the certain lords of capital. Even those motherfuckers were against it, you know? So,
like I said, I think it was bad what happened, but I knew that it was theater. It was orchestrated by certain people who are on the inside. Now, that doesn't mean that and when I mean orchestrated inside, that means that the security people on the ground, that means the majority of them did not know what was going down.
No
that was
doubt.
some other players. There might have been a couple of people on the ground of security, but the vast majority, like that cat who was leading the crowd astray from the Senate Hall, he obviously was a person that they didn't give him any information about it. It looked like he was generally trying to handle that and whatever. But it obviously was wrong, but it just was like, you know, in a sense, it could be one of them things. Well, if it's allowed to happen, you know, we allow certain things to happen so other things can happen. You know, so I don't know. I mean, nobody on the surface of this is going to definitely agree. But, you know, in a sense, it was good to see in the sense of what they allow certain people to do, what they allow other people to do. What was the extent of that anger where people would go up in there to feel the need to do what they did. And the fact that there were people who will sell. So that meant that security that sold that allowed it to happen saw those people almost every other day, looked them in the face. Hey, how you doing? Spoke to them, and knowing that they was going to sell them out, you know.
And that was a point I was going to actually pivot into, right? Because if you look at the visuals of these things, like, you know, you had people who generally were like, what the fuck is going on? And they just try to do their best to do their jobs, right? Because I think as of this broadcast time, I think they said about like 50 cops were injured. I know there's 5 dead people, including one Capitol Police person who got attacked and killed. I think they just showed the picture of the dude who they think did it recently online. And I think another Capitol Police officer ended up committing suicide afterwards or whatever. When you see these particular things, like, you know, I'll be like, stuff is an inside job, but everybody on the inside wasn't about it. And that's why I said when certain stuff wasn't organized a particular way, that's the main thing that saves certain stuff from going down. Because I remember seeing this joint like a day or two ago where Maryland's governor, Larry Hogan, and you know, I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of him, but I will give him props where props is due when he's done certain stuff like with the COVID or whatever else over here. When, you know, I saw this thing on the news where homeboy was talking to the newscaster, and he was just there like, yeah, you know, we're seeing the news. We're like, you know, what the hell's going on? We need to try to get National Guard, et cetera, over there. They said certain people were not picking up those calls. And that's been reported on different levels from both Virginia and Maryland. Because, like I said, D.C. had kind of its own, like, weird situation going on because it's not a state. So you had somebody at a certain level who was trying to, you know, see how far it could go. And you had other people who were just there like, nah, like, this is super weird, including, you know, those folks on the ground or whatever, whether they were, you know, Capitol Police or, you know, DC cops or other people. You know what I mean? And, you know, you had some folks that had to push it to a certain point so things wouldn't get to a particular way. And I think about it a very interesting aspect in terms of the Capitol Police situation, because like you said, you know, there are people who they work with each other and I think that's most jobs, right? You got some folks you work with every single day, but you don't see how things go until shit hits the fan. Or until a certain topic comes up. Or whatever else. You know, you had some Capitol Police cats who saw who they were working with for the first time. Where, you know, you used to have that thing, it was like, you know, that all for one thing that I think, you know, some of us get when we get into a group, you really realize who ain't about that. They had the extreme version of that. Some of those cats I'm sure in that government building were just probably just there like, yo, I thought we were at least, even on the theater, and I thought some of these cats were like, oh, I know we were all about the theater until shit got real. You're learning a lot about folks, man, and I think sometimes like people, I think forgiveness is good, but forgiveness is good when people earn forgiveness. And this country has a lot of stuff it needs to earn forgiveness for from multiple groups of people. And that's before things get too late, because, as Malcolm X says, talk about when the chickens come to roost or whatever. Some of those cats didn't expect the chickens to come to roost on them. And I think if folks don't learn that lesson, that's going to get, worse. Like, some of those folks didn't expect those chickens to have rabies and start picking at their ass. They expected, to be able to control stuff and move stuff back and forth. They thought they were in control of certain chess pieces, and they really weren't. Including Trump. Trump is a chess piece. Yeah. Some people played him to get certain stuff that they wanted, you know what I mean? And they got to a certain point, but then, instead of maybe being a bishop, he might have just got a little too buck thinking he was a king. And now certain things are happening, And personally, for me, I think everybody should get it. I think people who, if they were stupid enough to do a crime, should get it. I think folks up top naturally should get it, or whatever else. How many people are going to? Who knows? You know what I'm saying? Like I said, like it's kind of weird looking at the news and seeing some of these motherfuckers who were just there like one day ago, like, yeah, I was at the White House, and the Capitol storming shit, and we were fucking up DC, crying because the cops are at their door. I don't feel bad for them. I don't feel bad for none of those cats. I don't feel bad for none of those cats who like posted up with their shit on social media and now they crying because they can't tweet or Facebook or some shit. I'm not mad at people who, even if that was your thing to do, you weren't smart enough to put a mask on in one of the most surveilled cities in the world. On top of the fact that you made some people mad, you thought it was cute until you didn't. I'm not mad at some of these. I don't feel bad for some of these folks who can't fly home because they were dumb. They got on a no-fly list. That was your poor decision making. That being said, like, even in the best case scenario, if everybody gets it, we still got to worry about the next steps. We still got to resolve the old shit that led to this current shit. Like, I'm really worried about the entire sweeping under the rug thing that we're kind of seeing in live action right now because we're in a 24-hour news cycle. And, a text like Gary had people talking about, well, we should forgive and this, that, and the third. I'm like, what is this? You know what I mean? Like, y'all motherfuckers are wild because, again, I know we're putting the politics of theater, but let me tell you something. If somebody set my ass up to get shot or killed, I'm not going through a whole bunch of theater. You know what I mean? About having power and being there like, nah, we ain't gonna, 25th Amendment or throw somebody in jail. Like, I'm not a fan of Mike Pence, but I'm like, it's like, bro, they set you and your family up to be the fall guy. If not Trump, a whole bunch of other people were just there like, we're fine if you dying. And I think that to me, shows the degree of how intoxicating this entire illusion of power is, whether you want to call it capitalism, white supremacy, or both in America. Because you ain't going to try to get my ass killed. I'm going to act cute afterwards. You know what I mean? Or injured or whatever. Like if somebody broke into your house in most parts of this United States, you'd be able to shoot or hurt them if they broke into your crib and try to do something else. But these cats are like, let's make a pretty speech, bruh. Maybe that's why I'm not in politics. My black ass could be the one. I'd be a vengeful bitch after some shit like that happened, But again, I think it shows that we got to be not so. I mean, the government, of course, is a worry, but I think we just got to be worried about the misplaced pride so many people have in this country and what they think it represents. Not as best ideals. Like the best ideals, we all totally understand why people fight for them and so forth, but I don't think we've been remotely close to those best ideals. And so people try to go to the opposite direction. And I think we got to just, be on our toes. I mean, being on our toes doesn't mean being scared of living every day. Like there's a certain amount of people want you to be scared of living, and fuck that. You know what I'm saying? That's whack. But we got to look at the world, for what it is. And there's a whole lot of work that needs to be done, but at the same time, you can't be scared, but you also can't be a sucker either. Like, I'm worried about the
doubt.
sucker moves I see getting played right now, where it's just they're like, well, they were just funning. It was just they're like, yo, if I tried to be funning the way those cats were doing, I wouldn't be around, you know.
No doubt. And the best work is going to be internal work, in a sense of one reaching or recognizing that they need to be their higher self, their God self, and focusing on that, and that can also mean what individuals want to do for themselves in the sense of earning more or doing things in the area of economics. You know what I'm saying? Inner self would be more or less first focused on one's own life or spiritual nature, the best aspects and quality of oneself, that one having control of one's thoughts and emotions, and not on a scheming, get over, manipulate, mentality, but more and more of, healing, helping, consoling, not trying to get over, and, when that's not the, these temples, these magnificent temples were built in relation to those ideals. So that lets you know whether these temples in India, whether these temples are still underwater off India, or Yonaguni off Japan, or the pyramid city to the west of Cuba underwater, or the beauty that's in the pyramids in China, Mexico, of course, the Nile, and that was about. Those were based on higher ideals. So man at his best is under a ma'at, or under a certain righteous order within one's own mind. Therefore, it's in what everybody has that, the higher men, the higher women are doing that. It's the order of civilization. And we look at marvel at these pieces years later. But that has to be understood, that man at his best did marvelous things. And, marvelous things still get done. But, none of us believe that, the Nippon Corporation in 1976 tried to rebuild a pyramid in Egypt, and because they felt that they had the mathematics and the ability. The Japanese were in there. After a little while, they had to use modern equipment because they didn't have the know-how that the ancients did. So it just goes to show you that man at his best, isn't necessarily selfish or trying to outdo the next person or put people down so they can get higher up on some internet thing. That's low down mentality, trash bags. At the end of the day, you just go do you, and then, let it shine. If I say something bad about the name, it's because somebody's bringing something my way. But at the end of the day, it don't even matter, because, us at our best is not us attacking one another. We might see TV shows that are doing that, but that's not human beings, and that's to sell and to get people to watch. The human beings at our best. See, that's why I love some of these shows in the sense of the beautiful women that are on them shows, but I don't always watch those shows because my higher self is not one that, that was kind of my problem with gangster rap. It was like, your higher self is not being that. You can maybe have certain qualities in the sense of self-defense that you can, that can maybe stimulate you to do. But in the sense of higher self, your higher self is not not violent, or is not a gangster, or that's one's lower self, but that'll never be a higher self. So in a sense, if people assume that means, or just anything that they assume does higher self that is selfish, or it's not for the better community. It's just they're in a loop cycle. They haven't come to that point, or when that point comes up, they ignore it. So it's like, But that's the basis of basically, of basically all civilization, and so that's basically where we stand. So obviously that stuff, we don't, I just to be clear, I don't condone any of that thing that had happened, even though I thought it was theater and I knew it wasn't going to last long and I knew it wasn't going to affect black people. That wasn't a real coup. I thought, the more people would have died if it was a real coup, or more people would have died. Some people died after the fact. I mean, during that time, one person got shot, and some people had died of like physical shit later. So
no doubt.
real coup
I
would
don't
have
feel
been
sorry
much
for
more.
her ass either.
Yeah,
Not
so
one
if
bit.
it would have been real, there'd have been much more body bags and much more of a body count, no doubt about that. But anyway, that's what it is, and it's just more or less of a shock. We kind of, I guess, will sometimes comment on things that are big news or whatever, whether we're affected by it, or really concerned by it, because I'm more, like that thing. I'm more like that and COVID have two things in common to me. I'm not concerned about them. I'm more concerned about what people feel about them and how they will act as a response to this new idea that is now in their head. You know what I'm saying? Of a sense of anarchy or a sense of fear because of some disease. You know what I'm saying? Keeping it clean, wearing a mask and shit. I mean, I like the mask aspect because it keeps me being concealed in a sense, in a way where it's like it's slower to be able to read you. So I almost look at the mask as a good thing. So I have not whatever, but the Most High has all this or whatever, and I'd want to learn whatever I can learn. So I'm cool while I'm here now, and then I understand what I got to do to embrace and get through to and the afterlife. So everything is cool. Everything is very good.
No doubt. And
Yes,
I'll just wrap
indeed.
this up real quick because, I mean, like Black Hawk said, this was an important situation, right? So I think we had to talk about it, especially from our particular perspectives and whatever. But I think the interesting thing was, like, the reactions. I think the reactions might have been the most interesting part of it, besides the obvious, what the fuckery of it all. Because, there was a bunch of clown motherfuckers out there, and I think that was wild to me, right? Like, the reactions to me, I think, are actually, besides the obvious political whatever, that has been a fascinating situation. Because, like, for me, like, especially being online, and with the people who I follow, who follow me on like Twitter and Facebook, etc., like seeing the dichotomy of what type of lives people have lived when you saw the reaction. Because like some of my international peoples are just kind of there like, this was light work, what the fuck are y'all whining about, you know what I'm saying? But they also crack jokes in the US because the US always had this big arrogant thing going on. You had a lot of Black America and other people of color who were just there like, wow, that shit was wild, but we been told y'all this shit was gonna happen. Y'all motherfuckers ignored us, right? And then you had different things from different, like, white Americans and or people of monetary privilege. Like, some folks who are genuinely like, yo, what the fuck? Because, again, like, they got broken out of the illusion of certain things not happening here, right? Or American exceptionalism, or more so the aspect of things happening to the people they think shit would have happened to, which is usually white folks of certain power and influence. And you had, some people who already been, I'll just say on the side of common sense and right, because that's people of multiple backgrounds who are just there, like, they might have been starting a bit like, wow, that's crazy, but then they, pivoted to a certain point. And you just had the white folks who were in utter denial about everything. And I think no matter how old I get, even, in my early 40s, that blows me. I'm just there like, what the fuck do y'all need to see? But again, like I said, maybe people aren't going to ever see because they don't want to, They always want to have the blinders on themselves. Where it's just there like, this was a whole bunch of, people who weren't about, at bare minimum, these were a whole bunch of people who weren't about democracy, mixed in with races and other narrative worlds who railed up in here were bugging. And you have folks that they're like, nah, it was, BLM in disguise or Antifa. Well, that's like, yo, dog. You just being purposefully blind. And I think one of the things I always hate about stuff like this when it happens is the hypocrisy of what goes down, you know. And shout out to the international media. A lot of them were pointing out certain stuff like, hey, when you had these folks protesting about A, B, C, D, or E, y'all had mad cops out here beating folks down, and, you know, you had some peaceful folks getting all kinds of fucked up. But you have folks literally climbing the Capitol and, you know, wilding and, you know, walking out with podiums and doing certain shit and, you know, beating down on cops or whatever. And, you know, there was a lot of people were trying to be cute about it, you know, or your security was mad low. Why is that? And, you know, for a bunch of us, we're like, we been know why, you know. And a lot of problems don't get solved until we look at our own hypocrisies and our system's hypocrisies. And I think that's going to be the big lesson we're going to learn about, not just this, but a whole lot of stuff. But yeah, we're going to be up in here, and we're going to keep on keeping on. And I just got one or two quick things to say before we wrap it up, because I don't want to necessarily end on that particular note. First and foremost, R.I.P. to Eugene Wright. He was part of Dave Brubeck quartet back in the day. At the bases.
Okay.
So
Okay.
like for folks who heard the original cut of Take 5, that brother was a part of that.
Okay.
Or whatever. And if folks don't necessarily hear Take 5 playing in their head or whatever, that bass line and all the other joints at that 5/4 mark, we're in the age of YouTube and Spotify, Google it. You've heard the song or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So he was part of that original part, and you know, he was literally the only black dude who was part of the group back in the day.
No doubt.
Or whatever, like way back in the day. And if folks look up his New York Times obituary, you know, we talked about the racial stuff that folks dealt with. And, you know, Dave Brubeck was one of those jazz cats who was, you know, always very upfront about, you know, not being about, you know, the racial bullshit per se. So they just had various stories where it talked about, you know, they were like southern places where they're like, we're not going to play in your town because you're trying to exclude our boy or have him way in the back or whatever. And other stuff like that. So, you know.
And what's interesting about that is that black people created jazz, so that's why, like, there's certain special white people out there that, and Frank Sinatra was like that, where they wouldn't do certain things, and because of they had black artists with them or in their entourage, or in so, you know, that was a special moment for them to do that. But what is also special is that they're having people come play jazz, and they don't want a black person there, but it was black people who invented jazz. So
exactly.
The mind plays tricks on people.
No doubt. And side note, if y'all already, like this kind of side relation, if y'all already haven't seen that Ma Rainey's Black Bottom on Netflix, please do so, because you're going to see certain elements of that in that flick if you already haven't seen it. Or whatever, like the literal whitewashing of, you know, a black created musical art form, particularly a black American musical created art form, and what have you, and how people try to control that. But condolences and, you know, praising that to his family, friends, and fans, and so forth and so on that end. Side note, if y'all already haven't seen that commercial for the Equalizer TV series that's supposed to have Queen Latifah in the Equalizer role, that shit looks ill. I look forward to watching it in February. I hope she does a great job in, you know, an action-y type of role. And I mean, your girl ain't really the type of person who watches CBS unless I'm watching with my moms or my aunt or whatever. You know what I mean? But I saw that on promo. I might have to sit down and watch a few episodes of that joint. Like, it looks like they're taking it seriously. And you don't see, you know, black women in action roles, much less on action roles on regular TV series. So
Now,
I'm definitely looking forward to that joint.
Yeah, I'm definitely looking forward. I was a fan of the Equalizer show, that the original when it came out. It had the old British dude on there. I was a fan of it then, and of course, I was a fan of the Denzel movies of when he did that. I thought those were stellar joints. I especially like the first one, and I had saw the trailer of that the other day. So naturally, I'm old school, and so I was, you know, I didn't know actually that was an Equalizer trailer until you just said that. I saw this something the other day, but I didn't know that was the Equalizer. You know, naturally, I'm an old school dude, and most dudes will not necessarily say what I'm about to say. So naturally, I'm more bent on it being a male in that role. You know what I'm saying? You know, but because I like Latifah was really one of my favorite female rappers back in back in the day, and Latifah's was from around the part of Jersey I used to live in, so I'm familiar with that, Irvington, Newark, East Orange area very well. Actually, went back to Jersey yesterday, had to to get some things or whatever, and I'm back in the DMV. And so I'm very familiar with that. That was part of Jersey I went to. It's part of the area that, she came up in. So I want to see her succeed because she's one of those, one of those cats. You know what I'm saying? I'm going to have to be connected with those cats forever. And that area forever. And, as far as I'm concerned, that was another borough in New York, and that was great. Like when I was talking about the last show about Houdini and then whatever, about the vibe of the old school, that was kind of how I saw through that lens and part of Jersey was how I embraced it. And that was ground zero. That was really ground zero for the culture. And Latifah came out of that. And so I definitely hope the best for her, period. As old school Jersey cat, period, just as an old school Jersey cat, and then as because most hip hop cats don't necessarily die doing hip hop. Some of the best don't necessarily die doing hip hop, and she was definitely, I felt, was one of the better female MCs, and who didn't necessarily have to, kind of like the female MC before it got to be, what it is today. So definitely big up to her.
No doubt, no doubt. And side note, not even to get into what we were talking about earlier deeper, but just last quick side note, shout out to all the folks who've been calling out the folks who are bullshitting or whatever during the joint last week. Like I know there was a big post where this 18-year-old chick literally, pointed out they moms, aunt and uncle who were at that joint or whatever, just they're like, this is some bullshit, fuck up. And she was blatantly talking about, you were telling me not to be at, the BLM protest and all that other stuff against police brutality, protecting black people, but you out here for this bullshit. And that just had me amused. So I'm like, well, don't piss off the wrong family member anyway. So I just wanted to dovetail back into that real quick. Also really quickly, as a kid back in the day, I used to love the Police Academy movies. I still like the first original ones, actually. Yeah. And homegirl who was in it passed away, Marion Ramsey. She was the chick who had the high-pitched voice, who played Officer Hooks in Police Academy, had a little, curly hair and stuff. And what have you. She passed away this week. She also acted in Broadway at the age of 73. So I definitely want to shout that out, because that's a part of my childhood, especially my young childhood memories of watching that joint on TV or whatever else. And like I said, I think the first two are still classic comedy, regardless of era. People can talk about the other ones, but I just always remember her being in them joints or whatever along with them. I can't remember the name of the brother that does all the sounds and whatnot. Shit,
that one brother. Yeah, I forgot. I remember people back in the day.
She was one of the other black folks in that joint. Yeah.
The brother who made the sounds in Police Academy. I remember they used to say he was going to make a record with Doug. I remember he said he was supposed to be trying to make a record back in the day.
Shit, just about everybody did.
Dougie Fresh, was the main one. Human Beatbox was the main cast during the time of the first Police Academy. The other cats developed their skills as time went on, but Doug Fresh and Human Beatbox was the main cast who was doing that. And the cat who was in Police Academy, he was nice too. He was nice. He wasn't necessarily doing beats, but he was just doing, he had noises or whatever. And, but that brings back good memories, the Police Academy.
No doubt. I just had to bring that to it, because when I saw that, I was like, damn, that's sad. And, be honest there, I just always, certain things, I'm not necessarily the biggest on certain kinds of nostalgia, but the kinds I'm on, I'm really, really on, and that was, one of those joints for me, personally. Or whatever. Also,
for me, it
side
wasn't
note,
about even the movie. It wasn't even about the movie. It was kind of the era that it came out in, because that was kind of that Houdini, Run DMC era that movie came out in. So that's all I was gonna say.
No doubt. And let's give me one quick second, guys. I got to plug this joint in. Still here, everybody. Just getting the computer plugged in because it's making that warning noise. Side note, for people who were like in the 90s especially, and were reading certain types of fictional novels or whatever, Eric Jerome Dickey passed away during the past week too at the age of 59. Lot of folks I remember, especially during my teenage years, were peeping his books back in the day or whatever. Like they were books, I mean, for me they were cool. Like I know people who were like super fans though, especially like if sister, friends and lovers and all of that. And he was one of those cats who, came up back in the day. And I think he had a whole other career before he started writing. I think he was like an engineer. Mm-hmm. And he decided he wanted to get into the creative arts. And obviously succeeded very well in it. So I'm always going to give, props and credit to folks on that end where it's due. Just 1 second, everybody. I got to plug this bad boy. I don't want to die while we're recording. All right. And we are back. Yay. Nice quick break. Or whatever. And let's see here. I don't know. I saw a lot of people, got upset because they saw Dr. Dre had a stroke this week and got checked into the hospital. Yeah. Or whatever. I think it was a stroke.
I heard the other day he had a brain aneurysm.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm trying to pull up the story here.
Because I heard the other day, so I didn't know he had a stroke.
It was brain aneurysm. Because I'm pulling up to date on TMZ right now while we're talking. It said he suffered a brain injury, which is serious enough already. You know what I mean? And I think he still was in the hospital or whatever for a minute. 55 years old, and those are serious shits to deal with. And I know for his family wants him to get better or whatever. I know that cat's going through a whole bunch of shit divorce-wise or whatever. But that was kind of wild to me because even though, I know anything can happen to people at certain times, it always kind of messes with me when I look at people who might be like, I guess will be my equivalent of an older brother age or whatever, getting sick with certain stuff. Especially because I'm not 50 yet. So when I see stuff like that, it's kind of like has me like, whoa, what the hell? But yeah, I know that joint happened this week. I'm just pulling up random stuff. I didn't want to like just have it be a completely political joint going on here today. Let's see here. Grammys got postponed, but that's COVID. That's not a terrible surprise that went down. A lot of Doom tributes are coming in, which is kind of cool to see. Mm-hmm. Like, I think it always just shows the effect of not just a person as, a person or as an artist, but, that creativity is always appreciated, hopefully more so when you're alive than when you transition, but there's always that type of theme that goes through with various folks. And, the power of your life and whatever else. Audra Day is going to be in that new Billie Holiday movie that's dropping in the next few months. I look forward to seeing that. That preview looked really good. Or whatever. And lastly on the entertainment end, and I'll just say more so on the quote-unquote black entertainment end, on Netflix there is a series called Lupin. It's a French series. And it actually has I don't know how many people have like either read about Lupin or seen the anime series. This is like similar to it. Essentially and it's actually cool because it has a black dude starring in it. This black fella who is in French is inspired by this dude who was famous for doing a lot of like grand thefts and schemes and stuff called Arsène Lupin. And in this particular series, there's this black dude who, motivated by revenge and everything, like just goes on this, robbery spree based off of the shit that he's done. And it's a really good series. And I would recommend for folks to go on ahead and check it out when you got some free time or whatever. It definitely has, the action and comedy and all that other type of stuff and, good drama and everything else. And it was just something I ended up being able to watch a little bit this weekend while I was doing some home things, and it was a nice surprise to see. And like I said, if you've been like an anime person, you probably already like seen Lupin the Third or whatever else, which is in the similar vein of all that. But it was cool to see a black dude just being on it. Yeah, I'm gonna be scheming. I'm also gonna kick ass too, and do some other cool stuff. And it's filmed really well or whatever else. So go on ahead and check those bad boys
Yes,
out.
indeed, ladies and gentlemen.
And lastly,
FuseBox Radio.
I know folks that talked about the Mandalorian beforehand. We got to sit down and talk about that one day. So I had a few folks who were curious in terms of how we felt about it, because we were talking about it highly a bit during our last commentary period. And folks shall get into that. I mean, I definitely want to talk about that maybe a little more in depth, maybe, in the next few days or so. And as a Marvel person, I know WandaVision starts up in the next few days for my Marvel peoples. And that series is going to be, if it's anything like, the comic personas that were in there besides what y'all saw at the movies, that series is going to be crazy. I know my ass will talk about it, if nothing else, on Disney Plus soon. And whatever else. And yep, I think that is about it for now. We just definitely want to get, some talk in the mix to our peoples, and, get in like a full FuseBox Radio show to the masses. It's been a little while since we were able to do that. So it's definitely good we got this in. Folks is wide awake and all that at the moment to get that cranked out. And as we always say, we appreciate that you sit back and listen in and check us out regardless. And, whether you agree with what we, talked about, disagree, etc. If it sparked your mind a bit and you got into some conversation with others about, certain things and topics, then we've done our job as quality independent media people and black media folks at large. And with that, we're about to get into the other part of the two-punch combo here with, our music mixes and whatnot with the show. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. FuseBoxRadio.com, again, our official website. Tons of stuff are linked on there, including for our musicians. I forgot to mention at the beginning of the show. There's information on how to submit music for that. And if you have other forms of media, because we are getting back into the interview mode. Eventually we're going to be getting back more into the movie review and written review mode, hit us up, and we'll try our best to get at you ASAP. TheFutonDone.com for live streaming DJ sets. And yeah, man, we about to get into it. And again, thank y'all for checking folks out. DJ Fuse rolling out.
FuseBox Radio, Assault Raw, Black Hawk, Blast Off. Peace.
All right. Peace.
You can listen to the FuseBox Radio Broadcast via iTunes, Stitcher, TuneIn Radio, Podcast Addict, and your other favorite podcast players. Check out the FuseBox Radio's official website for our latest episodes, events, and more at FuseBoxRadioOnline.com. You can also visit us on Facebook at Facebook.com/FuseBox Radio Show, Twitter at Twitter.com/FuseBox Radio, and Instagram at Instagram.com/FuseBox Radio. Feel free to contact us at FuseBoxRadio@gmail.com to submit music for airplay consideration,